Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's conversation. We are your hosts. I'm Mike,
And I'm Nathan.
and tonight we're going to talk about UFOs.
Yeah, UFOs, UAPs, Foo Fighters. They used to be called Foo Fighters back in Nam, back in Vietnam, and then I think they switched to UFOs after that. Then that became stigmatized through shows like The X-Files or History Channel, and now they're called UAPs, which is unidentified aerial phenomena.
When did that happen? Do you know?
I think it was about 10 years ago, something like that. I think after MUFON and these other big organizations started investigating UFOs and receiving the reports, the military kind of had to distance itself from the UFO community.
Yeah, it became a bit of a fad, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And you had all sorts of paranormal hunters and amateur UFO chasers, so it didn't paint a very good image. But I think what really sparked our conversation for tonight was the fact that Congress in the States, in the middle of their COVID-19 relief bill, had this UAP disclosure section, which is really bizarre.
So weird.
And we could get into that a bit later, but I think for our topic tonight, we're going to be addressing more of the evidence side of UFOs. I mean, there's all sorts of subtopics you can get into. You could get into, hybrid children. You could get into UFO spirituality, which we might talk about a bit. But why don't we start off with some of the mass sightings? I mean, everybody knows probably someone who's seen a UFO just by themselves. We're not talking about, Uncle Bill or Uncle Joe seeing a meteorite or satellite in the sky. We're going to start off with some mass sightings. One of my favorites is in 1942, where there's an incident called Battle over Los Angeles. And it's where this large object appeared in the sky around 2 a.m. and the city of Los Angeles went into blackout mode because they believed they were being attacked by enemy bombers. They weren't sure if it was the Japanese or some sort of other Axis power, but the Los Angeles Times actually has this photograph that shows the object sitting in the sky above the city. And you can see the anti-aircraft lights fixated on it. You can also see the tracer rounds colliding with it too. You can see it around this object. And the city remained in blackout mode for over 5 hours as the military fired more than 1,400 rounds at this object. And we're not talking about small munitions. We're talking about large anti-aircraft ballistic rounds.
Black cannons, I'm sure.
Yeah, like huge. And after they lifted the blackout at 7 a.m., they didn't find any wreckage, no aircraft debris, nothing. And when you go into Wikipedia, they say something like, the military was very jittery after a number of other surprise attacks, and they saw something in the sky and they just started firing randomly.
Well, I mean, look at the photo. All the lights are fixated on one object.
And we'll throw this photo up, but that's exactly it. Like, they said it was a weather balloon or something like that, but all of the lights are fixated on this object over the city, and this object remained above the city for about 5 hours. And when the military reported that it was a weather balloon and the military was just kind of jittery and they fired randomly into the sky, all these people came forward and said, no, we saw the lights fixated on this object. Like, we know it wasn't just nervousness of World War II. Going from there, we have the 1952 Washington Ufo Flap. And this was one of the more intense public sightings. Shortly before midnight on Saturday, July 19th, 1952, Washington National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base spotted 7 slow-moving objects that were out of the way from any civilian or military aircraft patterns. Then they both witnessed, and I quote, these objects speed up to 11,000 kilometers per hour.
Jeez.
To put that into perspective, the fastest jet in the world today, and this was in 1952, but the fastest jet in the world today is the Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird, which can travel at 3,500 kilometers per hour. So these objects were moving at 11,000 kilometers per hour. And both Andrews Air Force Base and Washington National Airport thought it was a joke until these objects stopped over the Capitol building. And honestly, if I saw something booking across the radar like that, I would think it was a glitch too. But at that point, the military scrambled interceptor jets to try and take these objects down. And in several of the cases, these objects would visually appear and disappear. this encounter happened for about 8 hours from start to finish. So again, this isn't some brief encounter. This isn't some blip in the sky that lasted for a minute or two. This is another mass sighting encounter that lasted for 8 hours, right? That's a long time. People witnessed these lights over the Capitol building. The fighter jets reported that these objects would pivot on 90-degree arcs, which is impossible for our aircraft, even our most advanced aircraft that we're aware of in common usage for the military. And there was no trail as well. So yeah, there's lots of other incidents we can cover as well. There's the Rendlesham Forest incident, the Phoenix Lights, the Costa Rican government survey photos, NASA's discovery footage. Recently, the Pentagon released 2 previously classified videos of these objects appearing on 2 fighter pilots' radar. And this is where the Congress disclosure comes in. These objects were booking it across the ocean. And in this report, they fully admit that they have no idea what these objects are.
See, and that's big. So I know a lot of people had big expectations about this disclosure. I don't know why we have expectations for these things anymore, but you know, some people were obviously hoping they were going to come out and just say, we're
aliens
in contact with aliens. Yeah. But clearly that's not the case. But the fact that they were willing to admit that some of these things, they don't know what they are, that's actually big. Because, I mean, the federal government of the United States is admitting that they don't know what these are.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
And in that report, you know, a lot of debunkers of UFOs over time have said that, you know, maybe these objects are enemy drones, experimental drones being flown in North America, or other unidentified objects. But this report actually breaks down into different categories. And one of the categories is drones. And their final category is unknown. Yeah. And a large quantity of these sightings are unknown. And remember, for these videos, I think they're called the Tic Tac videos. These are trained fighter pilots. These are fighter pilots who have been trained to engage with enemy drones and take down enemy drones, can barely track these objects on their radar. And in the other fighter pilots' audio recordings, you hear him say there's a whole fleet of them. Now, Congress didn't release those videos, but it's this object that is just booking it across the ocean, and the trained fighter pilots are like, what is this thing? Yeah. Like, it's something that's completely unfamiliar to them. And we don't just have these mass sightings, actually. We have other highly educated, highly positioned offices that are admitting that UFOs are real. So outside of photos and videos, you have VIP quotations. And this one's a bit dated, but it's still significant. You have President Harry S. Truman, who said, "I can assure you that flying saucers, given that they exist, are not constructed by any power on Earth." Like, can you imagine if Biden or Trump or Obama or Trudeau or Harper or John Chrétien came out and said today in front of everyone, "I can assure you that flying saucers, given that they exist, are not constructed by any power on Earth."
I can't even imagine that.
People would just freak out. And here this president has said that. Again, this isn't some congressperson, this isn't some staffer. This is a president has said that they exist and they're not constructed on Earth.
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness, right? You have astronaut Edgar Mitchell, PhD. He was the 6th man to walk the moon. He said, "I am an American astronaut and a trained scientist. Because of my position, people in high places confide in me, and as a result, I have no doubt that aliens have visited this planet. The American government and governments throughout the world have thousands of files of UFO sightings which have no other reasonable explanation. As a scientist, it is logical to me that at least some of these will have been witness of alien craft. As a former astronaut, the military people who have access to these files are more willing to talk to me than to people they regard as mere cranks, like you and me, Mike. The stories I've heard from these people, who are more highly qualified than me to talk about UFOs, leave me in no doubt that aliens have already visited Earth." So again, imagine some random astronaut who's been on the International Space Station, who's gone on the moon, goes on mainstream news, CNN, Fox, whatever, and says that I have no doubt that aliens have visited the Earth.
Yeah.
That's significant. How do we miss these quotes? I don't understand. We have all sorts of other quotes that we'll post later, but you have other witnesses like he might be the former Defense Minister of Canada now, Paul Hellier. You have Dr. Roger Lear. You have the Director of French Intelligence, Alain Juliet, who all say that UFOs and aliens are real.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting transition because, sometimes people believe that if they're willing to accept UFOs are real, they're not quite willing to accept that aliens or these beings are real. They'll say that it's just
the craft.
Men in Black, right? They'll say
Right.
that it's top secret technology or experimental technology. So how do we get into the conversation that these could be otherworldly beings too? Do you think, Mike, that these could be just Men in Black experimentations, some sort of secret section of the government, or do you think it could be more as well?
I personally don't think our governments are that advanced. I fully believe they have technology that would blow our minds, but not to that extent. So I really don't buy that one, that it's the government playing around in the background. I don't really see the purpose of it either, right?
Right.
Like, why would the government be doing something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, sure, they want to have superior aircraft or whatever to other governments, but I mean, you look at what we have, we're nowhere near anything like that. Not to mention these things are clearly
11,000 kilometers per hour.
and right angle turns. I mean, the only way you can do that is you have to nullify gravity. Otherwise, the G-forces will shred everything
Defy
apart.
physics, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't buy that. I really don't.
And when it comes to witnesses, you have civilian witnesses as well. And again, we're not talking about, Uncle Joe or Uncle Bill who are spotting meteorites or satellites in the sky. You have people who experienced aliens that weren't searching for them. Mike, you were talking about a Canadian incident earlier.
Yeah, and I mean, I always find some of the older reports a little bit more reliable because there's so many things nowadays like that can be misinterpreted as UFOs, like drones for one,
or the SpaceX satellites,
and there's so many groups of people that are looking for things.
Yes,
and so like they try and make things fit into what they want.
Right.
I digress. This one's from Manitoba, Falcon Lake. So this was in 1967. A gentleman named Stephen was out prospecting. So he's not looking for UFOs.
Yeah.
He's just out there prospecting. And he sees two glowing objects hovering ahead of him. One takes off and the other lands about 150 feet in front of him. According to him, it's a silver craft, 35 feet in diameter and brilliantly lit. So, I mean, for something that he clearly is struggling to comprehend, that's pretty specific. But here's the thing, is he gets close enough to touch the object. So he can't mistake anything at this point. I mean, if he's close enough to touch it, he's seeing it.
He's not wondering if it's like a minivan or something.
Right, exactly. So anyways, he's right next to it. He's within touching distance, and suddenly it lifts off, knocking him flat on his back.
Right.
So, I mean, if that was a conventional aircraft, he would have been incinerated.
Right. Yeah.
Right, or something like that. But he just got knocked on his back.
Goodbye, Steve.
Yeah.
His name's Steve, right?
Yeah, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah, he would have. Well, Steven, but we'll go with Steve. Anyways, following the encounter, he becomes very sick. And over the next few weeks, he suffers from diarrhea, headaches, nausea, weight loss, blackouts, which matches pretty closely to radiation sickness. But yet the doctors can't find anything wrong with him, and on he goes. And then 9 months later, he collapses and finds burn marks in a series of dots on his chest.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this throws Steve's doctor
for a loop.
I don't know, I don't know what's going on.
It's above my pay grade.
Yeah. So he sends some tests to the Mayo Clinic, very reputable clinic. And then weeks later, Stephen's doctor follows up with the Mayo Clinic to see what they found, and they denied knowing anything about these tests. Had no idea what he's talking about. There's no examinations done.
Right.
So just everything disappeared.
Yeah.
And, you wonder why or who or how, but, one thing, about Stephen is he was actually considered very consistent and reputable in his description of the events. It didn't go from, it was, silver to pink. To
details changed.
It was very specific.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, nothing came of it. I mean, after that, it just, everything kind of stopped. And where do you go from there, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
that's interesting. There was another incident. A lot of people are familiar with the Travis Walton incident. They made a movie about it called Fire in the Sky. Yeah. But he was a logger in 1975 in Snowflake, Arizona. And his co-workers, Mike Rogers, Alan Dallas, and David Whitlaw, Craig Hayes, and Bobby something, I can't pronounce that, Cogdill, noticed that he went missing. They came across an unidentified flying object. And Walton gets out of the truck and is struck by a bright green beam of light. And after that, he goes missing. The others leave. And again, these aren't paranormal hunters. These aren't ghost hunters in a building with their little, EVP readers. These are loggers who are just on their way home from a shift. Mm-hmm. And when they discover him later on, he has radiation poisoning, there's lost time, and there's a bunch of other weird phenomena that he reports. And what's consistent about this story and the story you just shared is the radiation poisoning and other weird phenomena like the dots on his chest. And this is before the invention of Google, where somebody who's looking to be identified as an alien abductee can go on Google and Google alien abduction symptoms, right? And so I agree with you. I like some of the credibility or authenticity of these earlier reports because these people who are in completely different places, who are unrelated, have some of the very specific symptoms that match up with other abductee phenomena. And Mike, when you reference that the Mayo Clinic may have lost the paperwork or may have had someone interfere in the paperwork with that particular case. Remember, this is before electronic databases were a thing. Recently, the Black Vault, which is an organization that really presses the government for FOIA requests, or what are known as Freedom of Information Act requests, which is where they have to disclose information from a certain amount of time ago relating to top secret documents. They released a bunch called Project Moondust, which showed a pattern of intentional neglect when it came to losing top secret documents that NASA had in their possession. Right. And Project Moondust showed that NASA was willing to go way out of their way to blackmail and threaten people who had discovered bits of meteorite and to hide that information. And if they're willing if they're willing to hide or get aggressive about, bits of meteorite, some of the most mundane of cases, how much more so would organizations like that go out of their way to hide potential UFO abductee phenomena, right? And that's where you start having the conversation about, well, is this, again, just Men in Black, or is this aliens as well? Now, Mike, do you think that these could be grays? Do you think these are extraterrestrial? Do you think these could be interdimensional? What are your thoughts? Are they strictly biological? Are they spiritual? Where do we go from here?
Well, I just had a thought about the physical aliens from another planet, or even the government secret aircraft. Okay, almost every UFO sighting, people talk about this bright light or this brilliant light. Okay, tell me which aircraft on Earth do they purposely make as bright as possible and just cover in lights?
That's true. Yeah.
Like they spend so much money to make stealth aircraft and
Yeah.
things where there's very little lights, and
That's
yet these
interesting.
UFOs are like blazing
Sure,
stars, right? It's like, okay, like it
It's
that
like a
doesn't
disco
make
ball, right?
yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
So, it lends to my thought that these aren't physical things. I don't think they're aliens from another planet, because again, like, it just doesn't make sense. Why would they be being as blatant with bright aircraft but yet trying to hide? And why wouldn't they just, contact us, right? I mean,
Right.
we're sending out radio frequencies all the time now into the what's it called,
The universe.
no, the satellites they use for those.
Oh, SETI.
SETI.
This,
Yeah. So I mean, how many years has that been going on? And
Yeah.
it's like, if these aliens were so advanced and they knew we were here,
Yeah.
I mean, they'd give us a little bone at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, I think, and maybe these two things go together, but interdimensional and or spiritual,
Right.
because a lot of what people are seeing, they can't really comprehend.
Right. Yeah.
They might say, it's silver and a brilliant light, and it's in weird shapes, and when you think about a dimension above the third, so a fourth dimension and or more, I mean, we can't comprehend those things.
No, we can't.
And if something somehow were to manifest in our dimension, it wouldn't really make sense to us. And
Right.
to me, that fits in with what most people experience.
Right.
They're seeing things they can't understand. Not to mention how many people talk about it being a spiritual experience.
Right. Yeah.
So I think the truth lies somewhere in there.
Right.
And that's not to say that there aren't going to be like top secret aircraft that maybe, considered as some sort of UAP.
Right. And that's a really good point, Mike. You don't have as much evidence for these objects entering into our atmosphere as you do for them being around our atmosphere and skies in general. You do have the Discovery footage, which shows this object in orbit suddenly exit orbit, which is really weird. But the majority of footage is from objects in and around our skies, which leads us to believe that these are most likely interdimensional, or at the very least that they come from here on Earth. But again, like we've gone over so far, we don't believe that it's just simply the government experimenting, because you do have these coinciding reports of these beings along with Men in Black, or sometimes the Men in Black by themselves, or sometimes these beings by themselves. And one of the interesting things about the abduction community is the spirituality around it as well.
Yeah.
I mean, if it were simply the discovery of a new species somewhere from a distant galaxy or different universe, it should be worldview changing. It should be textbook rewriting, but it wouldn't be this deeply spiritual experience that it is. It would be supernatural in the sense that it's beyond what we're accustomed to in the natural realm. But so many of these community members, especially the CE5 community, they have these deep spiritual accounts with these beings. I mean, the CE5 community has people going out into remote places or into the wilderness to try and summon them through meditation or through prayer.
Right.
And that could be really sketchy because, and it's not the total general consensus that these beings are all good, but it is the majority of these people that believe these beings are our saviors. They're here to cure our sicknesses and diseases. It's actually man that's the disease, which is true to some extent, but the danger is believing that all of these beings are benevolent.
Right.
And when you do that, you kind of have to do philosophical cartwheels to avoid the fact that people get abducted against their consent, they get experimented on, they get almost tortured and mutilated, which is extremely wrong. There's no scenario where that's okay, right?
Well, yeah, and you think about it, just because, let's say they're from another dimension, which, I think in the CE5 world probably is what they believe, because they talk about a higher conscience. And
right, yeah. Or universal conscience,
right,
too.
like, it's, But anyways, just because they're from a different dimension or a higher plane, doesn't mean that they're perfect. Like,
right. Yeah.
We have different, animals, humans, we all have our faults.
Yeah.
Humans probably most. But maybe when you go up further, you have more issues. Who knows, right? Like, you can't just assume because they're from a different level of understanding that there aren't good and bad
Right. Yeah.
beings, right?
Yeah.
So what makes you think that A, you can control what they do to you,
Right.
and B, their intentions are good?
Yeah. And I like how you pointed out that these could be beings from a higher plane of existence, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're good. I mean, they'll have more knowledge and probably better technology, but that doesn't assume that they're better off, that they're more humane than us. I think, I don't remember who was talking about it, but they basically compared to as humans we have moral objectivity. I mean, there's no culture on earth that believes that it's okay to torture babies for fun.
Yeah.
Right. But you look at a cat toying with a mouse. I mean, it doesn't believe that's evil. Right. Even though to us it's clearly the understanding that that is not good, that you don't do that.
Yeah.
Right. But how do you know these beings aren't like that, where they could just be toying because they believe that that's what's in their nature, that's what they do? And you have different accounts. You have people like Ellery Marzulli, who shared the story of the World War II fighter pilot who was guided home to safety by a UFO. And then again, you have these Travis Walton experiences or the Rendlesham Forest experiences where people are injured, they're hurt, they're abducted, or even killed. Right? Part of my fear is that people are almost playing with a Ouija board here, in the sense that they're trying to summon these things or communicate with these things with their intentions.
Well, and that's exactly it. It makes me think of a lot of the paranormal community, where there seems to be this belief or understanding that as humans we somehow have power over the paranormal world, and we send people off to the afterlife and stuff like that. And I don't understand where that comes from. To me it's a little bit of arrogance, in my opinion, because
totally.
Who are you to send someone off to the afterlife? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I feel it's the same thing with the whatever you want to call it, the alien community, or the community of people talking about extraterrestrials or interdimensional beings.
And the same thing could almost be said about the governments or organizations that may partner with them. And just aside from that, I've always laughed at some of these spiritualist groups who buy these crystals for $10-15 and think that they're going to control principalities from millennia's past that have been around for longer than they believe the universe has existed.
Longer than crystals have existed.
It's like this $15-25 crystal from the farmer's market is going to give you this power to wield, right? But going back to a point we were making earlier, what extent do you believe the government could be involved with partnering with these things, or even if they are? What are your thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, I really don't think the government has it all figured out. Like, I don't think that they're partnering with these beings or whatever and keeping it all a secret. I think they probably know more than we do, and that they're willing to admit. But I think they're trying to figure out what it is just as much as we are, and the information that they get, which is probably better than ours because of the resources at their disposal. They're trying to piece it together. So I really don't think it's a grand conspiracy of the government trying, or the collective governments or shadow government or whatever, trying to keep it a secret from us. Because if these beings are more advanced or from a different dimension, there's nothing the government can do to keep it from getting out.
They're just going to do what they're going to do.
Exactly. So no, I don't think that they have much of a part to play. I mean, there could be some aircraft that are top secret that are more advanced, but I don't think we're at the point where it's, anti-gravity and stuff like that. But I could be wrong. You know, I don't know. But yeah, that's kind of where my sense is on the government.
Yeah, I definitely don't believe that our elected world leaders play any part.
No.
I mean, you look at Truman, who at some point was aware of this going on. But I think one of the more enlightening clips I've seen from a sci-fi movie was in Independence Day, where the president goes down into the secret bunker and he's like, why didn't I know about these UFOs and stuff? And the agent says, well, plausible deniability. And it's true. Something you mentioned earlier was that, these offices are temporary, but these organizations are forever.
Yeah.
And I think if there is any sort of partnership, that it's involved with a very secretive, very cabal-like group of individuals rather than the government itself. And I think even within those groups, the information is very compartmentalized, where certain parts of the group know some of the information and other parts of the group know different information, but nobody has the whole picture unless they're in the upper echelons of these groups.
Yeah.
And aside from conspiracies, aside from the paranormal itself, we see those cabals existing today. Something we'll cover in a later podcast is Bohemian Grove.
Yeah.
And it's this event that takes place every year in the Redwoods of California. They've got this giant statue, I believe it's Molech, that they do a mock sacrifice to. And history shows they may have done actual sacrifices to at one point. And the atomic bomb was conceived here. Our world's celebrities and political leaders attend this event each year. They put on robes. It's freaky stuff. So really even UFOs aside, there are groups that are, scheming behind the scenes to domino the world or to place the chess pieces of the world together.
Yeah, I think we've given you guys some good information to chew on and think about. But as is the nature of mysteries, we don't have the answers. We can only talk about it and speculate and try and get down to the bottom of it together.
We've probably left you with more questions, but again, this is meant to it's meant to just be a primer. Like we said earlier, there's a lot more when it comes to UFOs that we could cover and we will cover in future episodes. But for tonight, for Midnight Mysteries, I'm your host, Nathan.
And I'm your host, Mike.
Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.